And without further ado, then I hand over to you, Mara.
Thank you.
To actually introduce yourself and start talking about how to talk to kids about money. And while you do that, I'm going to put out a poll for the audience so they have something to look at.
Absolutely. We prepared a few questions to warm you up and to take the temperature a little bit before we're going to deep dive into the content. So my name is Mara Harvey, and thank you, Olga. Thank you, Smart Purse, for inviting me to this webinar tonight. I am extremely passionate about the topic of financial literacy, whether it relates to women, whether it relates to children, or whether it relates to the broader audience generically, because it is such an important topic in today's world. And why is this particularly close to my heart? Well, simply because it's been something that I've been confronted with, call it over the past 20 years of my career in finance, and understanding that the problems that we're trying to solve today to advance gender equality are not actually making the progress that we'd like to see. And when we try to understand why things are not progressing fast enough, we need to understand the root causes. And it was that research around root causes that led me to understand that our narrative around money is so biased that actually the problems are not going away, they're just perpetuating themselves. So maybe it would be great to see whether we have any answers already to our poll before I jump into the slide deck and run through some of the main points that I'd like to tackle tonight on this webinar.
Well, the result of the poll shows on the question, do you think children and teenagers today are aware of pay gaps? 66% of everyone on the webinar believes no, and 33% believes yes.
Okay, that's great. Are we going to go through all of the questions right away, or will we
do you want
go
to
through them one by one?
No, I think I would probably push ahead with the presentation and then...
Lovely. Good. So we can come back to the second question a little later. So let me put up a couple of slides and run you through a few of the key messages that I really was keen to share with you today. So indeed, my work around Smart Way to Start came to life precisely because progress on gender economic equality is slowing down rather than accelerating. And according to the World Economic Forum, at the current pace, it's going to take another 257 years for that to happen. 257 years, if you take a 30-year average, means it's going to take 7 generations, which means our daughters, etc., will not see gender economic equality in their lifetimes. And that is probably the most depressing reality there is. And as I mentioned, one of the root causes behind this problem is the way we talk about money. So we need to change the dialogue around money if we hope to see progress in the near term. Now, what do I mean by that concretely? The fact that our narrative around money is profoundly biased leads to the fact that already by the age of 10, girls are experiencing pay gaps when it comes to pocket money. Now, that might be quite hard to believe because people might think, well, no parent would ever intentionally discriminate against their daughters. But all of the statistics on this topic and on pocket money analysis show that girls are getting less than the boys. And it can be for multiple reasons, but fundamentally, the societal bias that we see whereby women are less paid for care work already shows up in statistics around pocket money. Girls get paid less for the kind of work they do. And knowing that confidence to talk about things, to negotiate things and so on is shaped by the age of 5, and that actually children's money habits as adults are largely set by the age of 7, I just came to the conclusion that we are tackling the problem 20 years too late if we are only addressing it when people enter the workforce and start talking about equal pay at that stage. And this is why it's so important to know whether the children and youngsters and teenagers are even aware of these pay gaps, because it is going to be a reality for them and for all the generations after them. So if they're not aware of the problem, the likelihood that we're going to solve the problem is quite low. There you go. Should we maybe take the second question before I go forwards?
Yeah, which I already had people polling
wonderful,
for you, so
wonderful,
I'm going
wonderful.
to read a result.
There you go.
So, do your children realize they will face pay gaps themselves? I'm actually no optimist here. Everybody
Absolutely. And this is the
agrees.
saddest part of it, because I made that experience with my very own daughter, who has a mother who talks about diversity and equality for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And even she didn't think it was a problem for her generation. She was convinced it was a problem for my generation. And when I explained to her that actually it's not just because of the problems we encounter today in the workforce that we need to change the way we talk about money and equality, but it's precisely because of the generations that will come after that, that I think it was a wake-up call also for her. And this is essentially what has led me to my work over the past 18 months. I was very keen to find a new narrative to create an equal future for our children, and to find a different way of talking about money, to be able to address the fact that there's no reason that a girl should get less pocket money than a boy. And this is something that girls need to hear, and it's something that little boys need to hear as well, because they all play a role in making the future more equal. And this is why these little books came to life, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the series as we go along. And I'd like to explain why talking about money to children is so important at an early age. And maybe here we could now poll the question that relates to at what age do you think that we should start explaining money to children? Also, because I realized I already gave the answer to the other question about how many generations it's going to take. Oops. Sorry about that.
Poll is up and running.
Exactly. So at what age do we think we should start talking to children about money so that they understand the concepts of earning and spending and saving?
It's still going. Looks like a very keen and eager audience here. At the moment, majority suggests at the age of 3.
Interesting. Good.
So it's probably fair to say 71% suggest at the age of 3 and 28% suggest at the age of 5.
Yeah. Jolly good. Indeed, I think that is around the right age to start really talking about money to children. I would say the minute a child is capable in a shop of asking you to buy them something, latest then, that is a great age to start engaging them really about understanding money. So,
and Lisa has a question if you want to take
it. Yes, let me do that, of course.
Sorry, Lisa has disappeared. This tool is tricking us today.
Oh.
But here comes the question from Nadine. Do parents really discriminate against their daughters?
No, as I mentioned before, I don't think any parent would intentionally discriminate against their daughters. But again, the societal bias that is so pervasive that leads to the fact that certain kinds of work that women do tend to be undervalued. I mean, just take the example now in the context of COVID-19, where we see all the healthcare workers and we all realize how absolutely crucial their work is to the welfare of society, yet how little paid these professions are compared to other professions that are of very little societal impact. And I think that is a perfect example in this context to say we need to reconsider what we value and what we don't value. That is true on a societal level, but it is also true for us as parents. And I'll just give a stereotypical example just to make the point. Let's assume that you have a boy who washes a car and spends an hour washing. And let's assume that you have a girl who washes the dishes and spends an hour washing. I would beg to make the case for the fact that the value of washing a car is higher than the value of washing dishes. And these are reasons for which boys tend to get more pocket money than girls, because they tend to do chores, or they are also encouraged to do chores that pay better than many of the chores that girls do that are maybe less paid or not even paid at all. And statistically on aggregate, there's a lot of data that proves this point. So I don't think it comes down to individual parents wanting to treat their daughters differently than the boys, but society as a whole obviously does, or there would not be this discrepancy at such a young age. And this is why starting super early is so important. And very often I encounter parents who say, look, my children are going to start getting pocket money when they start school. And in grade 1, they get 1 franc per week. And in grade 2, maybe they get 2 francs per week. And grade 3, they get 3 francs per week and so on, which is certainly one strategy that can be very useful with children. But I would like to really make a plaidoyer for we need to start way earlier than 6 years old. We really do need to start around the age of 3 for children to appreciate what money is, and especially not just to teach it to them in a theoretical way, but to make it as pragmatic and as hands-on as we possibly can. So the second piece of advice relates exactly to that. How can we make money moments visible? All of those little moments, which are now invisible because we're not even allowed to go to the restaurants and have a coffee nowadays with the COVID lockdown, it becomes even harder. But let's assume that when life goes back to normal and we can all go out for our morning cappuccinos on our way to work, and if we have the children with us and we explain to them when we are purchasing something what this transaction is, why are we handing money over? Are the kids conscious about those money transactions, or are they oblivious to them because the only thing they recognize is when they receive actually the goods that are being bought and it is materially in their hands? And to make money moments visible, especially with little children, that they understand this is an important moment. This is something to pay attention to. This is something to be careful about. This is something where we're going to actually check how much money are we giving, how much money are we getting back. It really is a learning platform that is super important for little children. And this brings me to the third point, how to engage the children in those kind of discussions. Again, if we explain to them that we are counting our pennies, counting our coins as we hand them over for that purchase, and we are checking what comes back. The child might yet be too small to count, but slowly they will understand the notion of counting. And then as they learn the numbers and learn to identify the numbers on the pennies, and as they get older, they practice their math. These are extremely important conversations to be had with very little children. And we need to then encourage the good habits. So even if they can't yet calculate exactly what they're doing, they might not be able to check their change and know exactly how many pennies did I get back if I gave 5 francs to buy a gipfeli, and what did I receive in return, and is it correct? But the importance of the transaction, the fact that there is a check and balance, there is a control, there is something to be paid attention to, and that the coins that you receive back need to be treated carefully and put away safely and not just left lying around or in a pocket, is extremely important. To that, I would add 2 more points, which I think we should always bear in mind where we try to talk about money to children. The first is we need to be disciplined with them. And what do I mean by that? If you decide to give your child an allowance, no matter how big or small, that allowance, if it is a monthly allowance or a weekly allowance, should always be given on the same day so that the child understands the notion of how long do I have to wait until my next allowance. And that is a super important part of the learning journey, because for little children, of course, it teaches patience, but it also sets the ground for 2 very important learnings that come later. The first being, how long do I then have to work before I actually earn money? And the second is, if a child, because they all do at some point, asks you, can I get my pocket money earlier? That one can introduce the notion of the cost of money. If you want your money earlier, it comes at a cost because there is negative interest, similarly to then understanding the notion of positive interest. And all of these concepts might sound extremely abstract for a 3-year-old, but it is those conversations that are going to set the basis for the future discipline of your child, and for them to understand by the time they are 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and 7-year-old, that those habits are really skill sets for life. It's a little bit like brushing your teeth. You know, if you try to explain the notion of caries to a little child, and that drilling a hole in your tooth to have it repaired is a really painful thing, they might look at you and just not really understand what's going on there. But certainly the good habit of brushing their teeth every single day is something that grows over the years. And with my own kids, it probably took me a good decade for them to actually brush their teeth without me telling them to go and brush their teeth. And the same is true of money habits. It just needs a heck of a lot of repetition. And because it needs so much repetition, I think our task has to be making it fun, because there's nothing more boring than repeating a task that is cumbersome. And so one of the questions that I am asked very frequently is the following: should we pay our kids every time they lift a finger in the household? And isn't that a bad thing to do? Shouldn't children just contribute to a household as part of life and part of being a family? Now, I definitely do not think that we need to pay kids every time they lift a finger. And I do think that contributing to family life is one of the most important value sets that we can transmit to our children. But having said that, the point that we're trying to make here in this money hour is not about how much and how little should we pay our kids and should they be paid for everything or not. The point we try to make is, are you as a parent creating the learning opportunities that your child needs? And how many of those learning opportunities are you creating every week, every month, every year for a little child to start practicing their money skills? Because the more opportunities you're going to give them, the stronger that learning curve will be and the stronger that understanding of these skill sets for life will be. So no, let's not pay our kids every time they lift a finger, but let's make sure for certain chores that we do define the value of those chores, and that we also enable the kids to have moments where they can negotiate with us. Because especially for the girls, negotiating skills is one of the core skill sets that we're going to need for pay gaps to close also in professional life. Do we have any questions at this stage? If we do just chat them in and I'll be very happy to reply to them, because I know some of this can be quite controversial. Okay, if there aren't any questions just now, then we'll go forwards a little bit to understand what are the key concepts that children need to learn, and how do we summarize those in a way that we have them always, at the forefront of our mind when we're dealing with money with children. I think some of them are obvious to us, of course, as adults, but precisely when we're talking to 3-year-olds, these things can be quite abstract, which is why it's so important to reinforce it. The first is really just keeping money safe. For a child to understand that money cannot be left lying around, money needs to be taken care of, money is not something you can go and take out of a parent's wallet at your pleasure, is, of course, one of the most important bases for any dialogue around money. It needs to be safe, it needs to be protected, and it needs to be respected. And you always need to ask an adult before doing anything that relates to money. I think that sets good ground for future conversations. The second and the third point are the notion of time in relation to money. It is, of course, quite abstract for children to understand that earning money takes time, but it is much less abstract for them to understand that spending money takes no time at all. All you have to do is hand it over and it's gone. And that is exactly one of the most important learning curves that we as adults need to manage. And here again, I would argue that the COVID lockdown, if it benefits us in one way, that is that our work has become visible to our children as we work from home. They see how many hours we need to sit in front of a computer. They are present with us, understanding that we are working when we tell them, could you please go away and leave me in peace? I cannot play with you right now. And that is a massive opportunity to explain just how long it takes to earn the money that then the family and the children can spend. So do use that opportunity. Do make it a visible money moment for your kids and make it an engaging conversation that the children understand. So how many hours a day did I need to sit today in front of my computer remote working? And what does that correspond to in terms of a child having to do chores to earn money? And how much time do they have to invest in contributing to the household for that money to be earned? And the fourth point relates to understanding that saving money is a skill set for life. And I'd like to underline here just how important this topic is. If we think about the fact for a moment that our children might well live to the age of 100, I'm going to run you through a very, very simple calculation just to make the point. Let's assume that all of our children have the privilege of going to university and being super well educated. And for simplicity, let's just round it up and say they start their professional careers at around the age of 25. Might be a bit early, of course, that would be great, but let's just round it to 25. And let's assume that by the time they will retire, retirement age will have gone up. Let's assume that they will have an active working life of 50 years. So from the age of 25 to the age of 75 is their active working period of 50 years. Now, the likelihood that after retirement, our children will live another 25 years till the age of 100 is extremely high. That means that they spend the equivalent of 50% of their working life, so 50 years of working life, in retirement. So full 25 years of retirement. Now, again, let's assume that during the first 25 years of their professional careers, so between the age of 25 and 50 years old, their life is going to be mostly about improving their quality of life. They want to earn well, they want to progress their careers, they want to be able to get their first flat and maybe start their own family and then buy their first house and have children and all the things that we all wish for. Which means that the savings potential for the very long run and for retirement is probably lower because a lot of the saving that is going on relates to improving quality of life. And just for simplicity, let's assume that everything that is saved during those 25 years really is then spent on quality of life and house and what have you. And that after the age of 50, let's assume that they had kids early and the kids are grown up, then they really have their earnings potential, career in full swing, and lots of opportunities to save. It would still mean that roughly 50 cents on every dollar earned would need to be saved in order to sustain the same quality of life after retirement. So just think about that for a moment. And even if you average it out over your entire working life, it would still mean roughly that savings and contributions to retirement, whether they're made by yourself or by employers and so on and so forth, should be roughly a third of everything that we earn after tax. And I just ask myself, how many of us even do that? Let alone how many of us encourage our children to think in those terms, that if we are not saving at least a third of everything we are earning, we will not have the financial capacity to sustain life quality after retirement. And this for me is such a serious issue that this is why I think we need to educate children on financial matters in a much more targeted way today than we ever needed to do for the generations in the past. Because the pension systems that we will grow into over the years were created in a world where life expectancy after retirement was a matter of years, certainly not decades. So people as such did not have to worry that they would live 20 years after retirement. If they lived 2 to 5 years, that was probably the average. And now the world just looks so different that the money skills from the past will no longer serve us in the future. The next set of skills that children really do need to understand is the time value of money itself and the cost of money. What do I mean by that? Positive and negative interest. Time value of money being that if they actually save their pennies, not just on a saving, not just in a piggy bank, but on a savings account. And yes, we are in a negative rate environment in most countries at the moment. So let's just translate that into investing, not just saving. There is an opportunity for your money to grow materially through compound interest. And the same way that compound interest will work against you if you take on debt. And if we see just how many youngsters today, already by the age of 20 and 25, have debt of one shape or form or the other, very often it's credit card debt, and that they don't understand fully the impact of that credit card debt over a lifetime, and the cost associated with it. This, again, is a learning and a skill set that happens at an early age. If you try to explain to an 18-year-old not to overdraw on their credit card, it's going to be much harder than if that child has been educated since the age of 3 on understanding that you cannot spend money that you do not have. Or you can, but it's going to cost you even more, and you're going to have to earn even more pennies by doing your chores to pay back that money that you're borrowing. And again, these might sound like very difficult concepts for 3, 4, 5-year-olds, but we've tried with the Smart Way to Start to really make it a very digestible conversation and to make it fun for the children. But last and not least, I think for me, the topic that is closest to my heart, beyond the narrative around equality and that girls shouldn't earn a penny less than the boys for the same job, is the notion of sustainability. So the objective of my 4th book is exactly that, to explain to children that every time they are spending their money, they are actually having a material impact on our world. Because money is not just a transmission of value. It's not just about circulating numbers and figures that translate into goods and services. It's actually a transmission of values. It impacts our world materially. Every single choice we make impacts our world. We recognize it as adults in making conscious consumer decisions, but that is also true for children. And if we can, again, educate them since a very early age about the impact of those choices, we have so much of an opportunity to create a better learning curve, a stickier learning curve, and for the children to know that every money decision impacts our world and can impact our world in a positive way. So that's really what is at the core of the books that I've written, and why I'm an advocate for financial education for children, and to be able to explain to little kids difficult concepts in a fun, playful, but serious way. And that's my objective. My hope is really that the next generation of children with these books will no longer associate money just with notions of power, competition, and greed, but that we can actually instill in them notions of equality, ethics, and environmental impact. And as you see here on the slide, there are 4 books at the moment, plus a 5th one. And I have to explain that because we have A Smart Way to Start, which is about earning, A Smart Way to Save, which explains that money in a piggy bank indeed can't grow. You do need a bank account for it to grow. And then the 3rd book is about A Smart Way to Spend, all the trade-offs that you have to make before you go out and spend your money, and really think about it. And also, if you want to buy a pet, do you realize how many costs are associated with a pet? Not just buying it, but feeding it and taking care of it and so on, because every child wants a pet at some point of their life. And the book, A Smart Way to Spend, actually has a secret chapter, a secret ending, which is an ebook only. Why is it an ebook only? Because it talks about digital money and how easy it is just to, with a tap or a swipe, to spend money, but it still takes the same amount of time to earn it. And because digital money can't be touched, the book on digital money can't be touched either, to try to reinforce that notion with children that digital money is even harder to manage because you can't touch it. And the last book, A Smart Choice to Make, is all about choices and sustainability and impact on our world, and understanding that when you buy a product, behind this product, there's a company. And do you care to know which company that is? What do they stand for? What are their values? What do they strive for in this world? And that if you ask, the answers will follow, because the answers are out there. So it's also about educating children to be advocates for not only responsible consumption, but hopefully later on in life, responsible investing. Because the same way when you spend your money, if you invest your money and you ask to which companies is my money going and what are they doing for our planet, you can have much more positive impact. And I love the little comment here that somebody, Rafaela, has said that her children are saving up for a cat. So there you go. If you want to know all about the additional costs that a little cat is going to incur, we've listed them in book 3. We've done that also for little puppies and for mice or little hamsters or whatever other little animals that the kids are keen to have. So that will be part of their little educational journey. And so that brings me to the end of my little presentation, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have, because the objective is really about creating a new narrative around money for a much more sustainable future. Sustainable in the sense of sustaining life quality of our children, and sustainable for our planet and for our communities. And I hope that my little books and my little red-haired girl called Marty and her birdie Francis can become companions for your children on that education journey.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks so much, Mara.
My pleasure.
Oh, at least you can hear me. That's fantastic, because my picture keeps freezing, but that probably belongs to the technical anecdote. One shouldn't be speaking about wonderful books on technical webinars, you know. There is something to be said about them really being physical. That said, some amazing things have happened. Julie managed to dial or rejoin us after 30 minutes, and she was asking whether there is a web replay. Yes, there is. And
Lovely.
thank you again, Julie, for trying so hard. I think it's so touching.
Indeed.
So everybody ask questions through the chat. I think it's probably the easiest and safest method, and Mara can read them and just take them as we go along. I hope you still can see my picture. I can't see myself, but that doesn't really matter. But let's exchange around this, because I think it is a top of mind topic for anyone who has children at home. I actually think that this topic is also particularly relevant when you are mother of two boys like I am.
Absolutely.
Because you do want them to grow into responsible young men that will build their girlfriends, future wives, women's or partners' confidence, rather than being, hindered by a bias and involuntarily diminishing it.
Absolutely. This message is just equally important for the boys and for the girls. My writing started with the objective of tackling equal pay and encouraging the girls to do chores, to negotiate with their parents, because what better training ground is there than the home? But it evolved to become a narrative that should be inclusive for boys and girls, and for parents, mums and dads alike, just to have those good conversations about equality, ethics, and environmental impact around money, because all dimensions are really important for our kids' future. Now, I see a question here about how do we explain the value of money when credit is relatively cheap? Indeed, I mean, credit is extremely cheap nowadays, so it can be very, very tempting to say let's leverage our spending power or investment power, and it can be a very good thing as well to do. I think what's important is for the children just to understand that money has a cost. That cost can be high or low. We are currently in an environment where that cost is relatively low, and we should make advantage of that and take advantage of it. But first, people need to understand what drives the cost. So to maybe use an example with a child that wants their pocket money before it's month end, and comes a week early and says, I really want to go out with my friends, or I want to go and buy a sweetie, or I want to go and buy an ice cream, but they've already spent all their last allowance and they should really wait a few more days until their next one. You could tell them, for example, to say, look, I can give you your 5 francs now, but that means that actually instead of getting the 5 francs, you're only going to get 4 francs 50, because getting money early has a cost. So you have to pay 50 cents. That's 10%. That's probably a little exaggerated. But to make it tangible to the child that getting money in advance has a cost is a super important lesson, because otherwise, precisely, children as they get older, if they're in a very low interest environment, can be dismissive of those interests. But what we really want the children to understand is the dynamics of interest, because the minute interest rates go up, it can really hit you by surprise in life. So I hope that answers that question. And I'm just checking whether we have any other questions here. No, I don't see any more questions right now.
It's because we have worn everybody out with technicalities at the start of all of this.
I hope not.
Thank you so much, Mara, for taking the time, for sticking with Webinar Jam for tonight.
My
And
pleasure
most
entirely.
importantly, to everybody who is joining us every week. As you know, in Switzerland, lockdown will continue, I think, at least for another 4 or 5 weeks. So definitely Money Hour is coming back. On that note, as always, we appreciate any comment and suggestion and theme you might want to or like to hear about. We are still trying to get the gold expert that Rafaela had suggested. So let's see, I'm hopeful that we might be able to do the Money Hour on gold next week. If not, we're going to do it definitely before the lockdown ends. That is a big, big promise on my end. And yeah, leave us a comment, recommend further if you can. You know what you're getting for the next Christmas present, which is wonderful books called A Smart Way to Start. And I wish everybody a lovely, lovely evening.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you for inviting me. And indeed, for anybody who would like a book, you can see the website there. You can download the first book as an ebook for free, share it with your friends, share it with as many children and parents who you think would love to have better conversations around money. And most importantly, stay safe.